In the remote stretch of the Dakota Territory, a widowed homesteader was about to cross a line no settler dared. What started as a stormy night spent checking on her dwindling garden took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a dying Sioux chief slumped against her cabin wall. Evelyn Mercer wasn't your typical frontier widow. For nearly a decade, she had survived war, personal loss, and the cruel march westward, known among neighboring ranchers for her quiet strength and uncanny skill as a battlefield-trained healer. When she encountered a blood-soaked horse lying beside the man, hooves trembling in the mud, she had no idea she was forming a bond that would shake the foundations of both her world and his. Evelyn opened her door and her heart in an act of mercy that would lead to a standoff no bullet could solve. What began as a desperate decision to save a life would become a test of allegiance, identity, and the fragile cost of peace. The windswept frontier would never be the same after Evelyn Mercer stood alone, surrounded, but not silenced. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thunder cracked the night sky open like an axe splitting wood. Evelyn Mercer flinched despite herself, her hands momentarily stilling as she measured dried yarrow into a small cloth pouch. The cabin shuddered around her, familiar timbers groaning against the punishing Dakota wind. She'd weathered worse storms in her 2 years on the homestead, but something about this one crawled beneath her skin. A warning, perhaps, or memory. Her fingers resumed their work, practiced and precise. The storm could rage all it wanted outside her walls. Within them, order prevailed. Organization meant survival out here, where the nearest town was half a day's ride and the nearest doctor. Well, that would be her, though she'd never claim the title. Just a nurse, she'd tell folks who showed up with wounds or fevers. Just someone who'd seen enough dying to know a little about living. The sound came between thunderclaps. A dull thud against her door, so unexpected that at first Evelyn thought a branch had broken free in the wind. But branches didn't groan. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle mounted above the hearth as she crossed the plank floor, heart suddenly drumming against her ribs. "Who's there?" Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. Only the howling wind answered. Evelyn hesitated, weighing caution against curiosity. The decision was made by a sound she recognized with visceral clarity, the wet, labored breathing of someone losing too much blood. The moment she opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. Rain stung her face as lightning illuminated her porch. The man lay crumpled like discarded clothing, one arm outstretched as if he'd used the last of his strength to announce his presence. Blood pooled dark beneath him, washing away in rivulets with each sheet of rain. It wasn't his blood that made her breath catch, nor the eagle feather half crushed beneath his body. It was the facial markings that identified him, as clearly as any military insignia, a Sioux warrior. And not just any warrior, judging by the ornate breastplate half concealed by his matted hair. A leader. A chief. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, a prayer and curse woven together. Every story in every newspaper, every warning from every traveling trader, every fearful glance from townspeople when talk turned to the Indian problem screamed in Evelyn's mind. "Take up that rifle. Close your door." Survival on the frontier meant knowing your enemies. Instead, she knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse fluttered weakly against her touch. "Sir? Can you hear me?" Nothing. Just that terrible wet breathing. Decision time. Evelyn had been here before. Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. Different war, same moment. Life hanging in the balance, and her the unwitting ferryman. She hooked her arms beneath the man's shoulders and pulled. He was heavier than he looked, all sinew and bone. The rain had soaked his buckskins through, adding weight and difficulty as she dragged him across the threshold. Pain shot through her lower back, a familiar companion since losing little Thomas during the journey west. She gritted her teeth and continued. By the time she had him positioned on her kitchen table, the best she could manage for an operating surface. Evelyn's arms trembled with exertion. The man remained unconscious, which was mercy given what came next. She cut away the buckskin shirt with shears, revealing the entry wound just beneath his right collarbone. No exit wound visible. The bullet was still inside. "You poor soul," she murmured, not to him but to herself, the Evelyn who knew exactly what this choice might cost. "What am I doing?" Yet her hands moved with muscle memory, gathering supplies she'd hoped never to need again. Carbolic acid, forceps, needle and catgut, her last precious morphine tablets, saved for emergencies. If this wasn't an emergency, what was? The thunder seemed to retreat as she worked, or perhaps she simply ceased to hear it. The world narrowed, to the wound, the breath, the struggle beneath her hands. He was strong. She could feel it in how his body fought, even unconscious. She whispered as she probed for the bullet, nonsense words of comfort he couldn't hear. "Hold on now, almost there, that's it." The bullet came free with a sickening pop. Relief washed through her until she noticed the seeping blood from a second wound along his side, a knife slash by the look of it. More stitches, more supplies she couldn't easily replace. As she worked, memories bubbled up unwanted. Thomas coughing blood into her hands as the wagon train pressed on. No time to stop, they'd said. Not with winter coming. Her husband John, eyes hollow after Gettysburg, telling her that God had abandoned the battlefield. Maybe he's abandoned me too, she thought as she tied off the final suture on this enemy warrior's side. When it was done, Evelyn slumped into her rocking chair, watching his chest rise and fall with slightly steadier rhythm. Outside, the storm began to subside, though rain still pattered against her windows. Dawn wasn't far off. She drew her journal from the shelf, dipping her pen with shaking hands. The words spilled across the page, as if distance on paper might make sense of tonight's madness. May 17th, 1877. I have committed an act of either profound charity or reckless foolishness tonight, and I cannot say which. A Sioux warrior, a chief by his dress, collapsed at my door, grievously wounded. I have removed a bullet from him and stitched a knife wound that would have surely been his end had infection set in. I wonder, as the blood dries beneath my fingernails, what John would say. Or little Thomas, had he lived to form opinions of his own. Would they call me betrayer? Does compassion have boundaries beyond which it becomes something else? Weakness, perhaps, or vanity? I recall the Hippocratic oath. The doctor swore, "First, do no harm." But sometimes I wonder if inaction isn't its own form of harm. The settlers in town speak of the Sioux with such fear and loathing. Mrs. Calloway lost her husband in a raid 2 summers past. She would call me traitor for this night's work. Marshal Boone would likely have me arrested, or worse. Only Isaac might understand, and even he would counsel caution. What will become of me when this man wakes? Will he see an enemy or a healer? Will his people come searching? My supplies are depleted. My secret, suddenly dangerous. I do not regret my choice. Not yet. But I fear its consequences may reach further than these 4 walls. Evelyn set down her pen, rubbing her eyes. The journal. Entry stared back at her, ink still drying, a witness to her transgression. Or her humanity. She wasn't sure anymore. The first light of dawn crept through her window. Evelyn moved to draw the curtain closed, to allow her patient a few more hours of sheltered darkness. That's when she saw them. Dark silhouettes against the graying sky. Mounted figures, a dozen or more, arranged in a perfect circle around her. Homestead, silent, watching. Her heart seized. They had come for him, for her. Evelyn stepped back from the window, her body suddenly cold despite the cabin's lingering warmth. The mounted figures remained motionless, like sentinels carved from the dawn itself. She counted 17 in total, arranged with such deliberate precision that it felt more like ceremony than threat. Still, her hands trembled as she checked her patient, still unconscious, but breathing steadier now. What would they do if she simply barred the door? Waited them out? The rational part of her mind knew the answer. These were not men accustomed to patience. They had come for their chief, and they would have him one way or another. Evelyn straightened her spine, smoothed her skirts, and touched the small cross at her neck, a habit from childhood that surfaced in moments of fear. Then she did the only thing that made sense. She opened the door. Morning light spilled across the threshold as she stepped onto her porch. The Sioux warriors watched her with impassive faces, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them. None made a move toward her. Perhaps they were as uncertain as she was about what came next. "He's alive," she called out, her voice carrying in the post-storm stillness. "But badly wounded. He needs rest." For a long moment, silence was her only answer. Then one of the riders nudged their horse forward, smaller than the others, with a frame that suggested youth rather than warrior strength. As the rider approached, Evelyn realized her mistake. Not a young man, but a woman. She dismounted with fluid grace, landing lightly before tethering her horse to the porch rail. Up close, Evelyn could see the woman more clearly. Perhaps 20, summers old, with sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed Evelyn with unconcealed suspicion. Her hair fell in 2 long braids, and while she wore no war paint, the knife at her belt and the set of her jaw made it clear she was not to be trifled with. "My father," the young woman said in careful English. "Where?" Evelyn swallowed. "Your father? You mean the chief?" She gestured toward the door. "He's inside. I removed a bullet from his shoulder. He's lost blood, but with care. Show me." The command brooked no argument. 2 warriors dismounted behind her, moving to flank the young woman. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before stepping back into her cabin. What choice did she have? The 3 followed, their presence immediately transforming her small home from sanctuary to battleground. The young woman moved directly to the table, where her father lay, her face softening for just a moment before hardening again as she turned to Evelyn. "You did this?" She gestured to the neat sutures and bandages. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I was a nurse during the war. The Civil War," she added, uncertain how much this woman knew of the settler conflicts. "I've treated wounds like his before." The young woman's eyes narrowed. "Why help him? He is your enemy." The question was so direct that Evelyn found herself momentarily at a loss. Why indeed? All the complicated reasoning she'd poured into her journal seemed inadequate now, faced with this woman's penetrating gaze. "He needed help," she said finally. I try not to see enemies when someone is suffering." This seemed to satisfy the woman, or at least gave her something to consider. She turned back to her father, speaking rapid words in Dakota that Evelyn couldn't understand. One of the warriors responded, his tone deferential. "My name is Evelyn," she offered, hoping to establish some kind of connection. "Evelyn Mercer." The woman studied her for a long moment. "I am called Running Deer." She gestured to the chief. "My father is Chief Chaska of the Mediwa Canton." Evelyn nodded, tucking the information away. Names were power out here. Offering them was either a gesture of trust or preparation for conflict. She wasn't sure which this was. "Your father needs time to heal," she said. "The bullet missed his lung, but only just. He's fortunate." Running Deer's expression flickered. Fortune had no part in it. The spirits guided him here. She touched her father's forehead. "Our medicine man should tend him now." "He shouldn't be moved," Evelyn countered, stepping closer to the table. "Not yet. The journey could reopen his wounds." For a tense moment she thought Running Deer might argue. or worse. Instead, the young woman surprised her. "Then our medicine man will come to him." She turned to one of the warriors and spoke in Dakota. He nodded and left immediately. Outside, a horse whinnied. Running Deer and the remaining warrior exchanged glances. "Another comes," Running Deer said, her hand moving to her knife. Evelyn moved to the window, her heart sinking. A familiar figure on a dappled mare approached cautiously, stopping well short of the Sioux circle. Isaac Talley had chosen the wrong morning for a social call. "It's my neighbor, Isaac," she explained. "He's a friend." Running Deer joined her at the window, studying the newcomer. "He has no weapon drawn." "He's not a fighting man," Evelyn said. "He brings me supplies sometimes, helps with repairs." She didn't mention that Isaac had once been a slave in Kentucky before making his way west. Somehow, it felt like betraying a confidence, even though it was common knowledge. Isaac sat astride his horse, taking in the scene with evident concern. He raised a hand in greeting to Evelyn when he spotted her at the window. Then, making a decision that sent relief flooding through her, he turned his horse and rode away, back toward town. He would get help, though Evelyn wasn't entirely sure what kind of help could possibly diffuse this situation. On the table, Chaska stirred. A low groan escaped him, drawing everyone's attention. Running Deer was at his side in an instant, murmuring softly in Dakota. The chief's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and fever-bright. He spoke a single, rasping sentence before his consciousness slipped away again. Whatever he said caused Running Deer to stiffen. She looked at Evelyn with new intensity. "What did he say?" Evelyn asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Running Deer hesitated. "He said, 'She has hands like sunrise.' I do not understand his meaning." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm inexplicably. "Fever words," she said, moving to check Chaska's. "Bandages. He's still not fully aware." "Perhaps." Running Deer didn't seem convinced. "Or perhaps he sees something we do not." The warrior by the door shifted his weight, drawing Running Deer's attention. They exchanged words, then she nodded. "Two will enter, our medicine man and another," she told Evelyn. "The rest remain outside." Evelyn nodded, relieved that the entire war party wouldn't be crowding into her small cabin. "May I ask, what happens now?" The question had been weighing on her since she first saw the circled warriors. Running Deer's expression was unreadable. "Now we wait, we watch, we see if you speak truth with your hands and lies with your heart." "I have no reason to lie," Evelyn said. "All white settlers have reason to lie," Running Deer replied without heat, as if stating a simple fact. "Your people made promises with forked tongues. Why should you be different?" The accusation stung, not because it was directed at Evelyn personally, but because she knew the truth in it. She had heard enough from travelers and soldiers to know how the government had dealt with the native tribes, promises made and broken, before the ink was dry. "I can't speak for others," she said carefully. "Only for myself, and I promise you, I want only for your father to heal." "Time will show your truth," Running Deer said, turning away to tend to her father. Evelyn busied, herself preparing a tonic for fever, aware of the eyes following her every move. Her sanctuary had become a test, her routine actions now laden with meaning and consequence. Something significant had begun with that knock on her door, a circle drawn around her life that would either protect or trap her. As the morning wore, how more Dakota tribespeople gathered outside. Some dismounted, setting up small fires just beyond her garden. There was no aggression in their actions, but the message was clear. They were settling in, watching, waiting. The medicine man arrived before noon, an elderly man with eyes like polished stones, carrying a worn leather bag that smelled of herbs Evelyn couldn't identify. He examined Chaska in silence, then her medical work with something akin to professional curiosity. When he finally spoke, it was to Running Deer, who translated for Evelyn. He says you have skill, that your medicine and ours may work together if we allow it. Evelyn felt a weight lift from her shoulders. I would welcome his knowledge. As the medicine man began his work, a combination of poultices and chanted prayers, Evelyn stepped outside for a moment of air. The circle of Sioux had transformed into a small encampment, with more arriving hourly. Women prepared food. Children watched Evelyn with undisguised curiosity. It was not at all what she had expected when she woke that morning. In the distance, a plume of dust on the horizon caught her eye. Riders coming fast from the direction of town. Isaac returning, and not alone. Evelyn's momentary relief curdled into dread. She knew how this would appear to the townspeople, to Marshall Boone and Sarah Ann Calloway, with their deep-seated hatred of the Sioux. A white woman harboring the enemy. A cabin surrounded by those they feared most. The circle was about to tighten further, and Evelyn stood at its center, suddenly certain that her act of mercy had set forces in motion that neither she nor anyone else could easily stop. The riders approached with purpose, dust billowing behind them like smoke signals. Evelyn counted 6 men, Isaac at the lead, his expression grave, and beside him, Marshal Silas Boone, back straight as a ramrod. The others were townsmen, including Reverend Porter and Samuel Whitfield from the general store. Running Deer emerged from the cabin, alerted by the sudden tension rippling through the Sioux encampment. "Trouble," she said, not a question, but a weary observation. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, "but perhaps not battle. Not yet." "Your people come with anger in their hearts," Running Deer noted. "Even from here I can see it." "They're afraid," Evelyn replied. "Fear often looks like anger." Running Deer's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "This, we know well." The riders halted at the edge of the encampment. Marshal Boone raised a hand, his voice carrying across the distance, sharp as winter ice. "Mrs. Mercer, are you being held against your will?" Running Deer touched Evelyn's arm lightly. "Let them wonder a moment. My people are watching. If we show them you are free to speak, it may calm their hearts." Evelyn stepped forward deliberately, moving away from Running Deer to make her freedom of movement clear. "I'm fine, Marshal," she called back. "There's no need for concern. Chief Chaska was wounded. I'm treating him, that's all." Boone's face darkened. "Ma'am, you need to come with us right now. These savages, they've done me no harm," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "And I'd appreciate you not using such language on my property." A murmur ran through the townsmen. Isaac looked torn between relief and concern. "Mrs. Mercer," Boone tried again, his tone shifting to something paternalistic. "You may not be thinking clearly. The situation is dangerous. Come back to town with us." Evelyn felt a flare of indignation. "Marshal Boone, I'm perfectly clear-headed. Chief Chaska needs medical attention that can't be interrupted. Once he's stable, we can discuss next steps." Boone's hand drifted toward his holster, a subtle gesture, but one noticed by every watching warrior. The atmosphere tensed like a bowstring pulled taut. "This isn't over," Boone called, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. He turned to the men. "We're heading back, for now." They wheeled their horses around, except Isaac, who lingered. "Evelyn, I'll try to smooth things over, but be careful." His eyes flicked meaningfully to the Sioux around her. Evelyn nodded, grateful for her one ally in town. As the riders departed, she turned to find Running Deer studying her with new interest. "You stood against your own people," the young woman observed. "For him." "I stood for what's right," Evelyn corrected gently. "They'll understand once their fear subsides." Running Deer looked unconvinced but didn't argue. Instead, she gestured toward the cabin. "Come, our medicine man wishes to speak with you." Inside, the air hung heavy with unfamiliar herbs and smoke. The elderly medicine man, Thomas Red Elk, knelt beside Chaska, his gnarled hands moving in deliberate patterns over the wounded chief. He spoke to Running Deer in Dakota. "He asks if you know the plant with purple flowers that grows near water," Running Deer translated. "It has leaves like this." She indicated something serrated. "Purple leucostrife?" Evelyn suggested, moving to her herb shelf. "I have some dried. It helps with bleeding and inflammation." Red Elk nodded when this was translated, something like approval flickering in his ancient eyes. He offered Evelyn a small bundle of dried herbs she didn't recognize. "He wishes to combine our medicines," Running Deer explained. "He says 2 paths of healing may be stronger than one." Evelyn accepted the herbs with careful hands. "I'd be honored. What is it?" "We call it snake root. It draws out poison, from wounds and from spirits." Together, they worked over Chaska's still form, each learning the other's techniques. To Evelyn's surprise, it felt less like compromise and more like completion, as if pieces of a puzzle were fitting together in unexpected ways. As they worked, Running Deer began asking questions about Evelyn's remedies. Her initial hostility had given way to cautious intellectual curiosity. "This tincture," Evelyn explained, holding up a small amber bottle, "is foxglove. It strengthens a failing heart, but the dosage must be precise. Too much becomes poison." Running Deer nodded. "Like the white man's words, a little truth can heal. Too much becomes lies. You have a way with metaphors." "And you have a way with my father's wounds," Running Deer replied, her tone softer. "He would have died without your help." A sound from Chaska drew their attention. His eyes had opened, clearer now, alert. He looked first at his daughter, then at Evelyn, recognition sharpening his gaze. "You," he said, his voice rough with pain but surprisingly strong. "The healer woman." Running Deer spoke rapidly in Dakota, but Chaska shook his head slightly, responding in halting English. "I wish to speak." Her words. Evelyn moved to his side, checking his pulse and temperature. "How do you feel, Chief Chaska?" "I live," he replied simply. "Because of you." His dark eyes studied her face with unsettling intensity. "Why?" It was the same question Running Deer had asked, but from Chaska it carried different weight. "I've seen too much death," Evelyn said finally. "In the war, on the journey west. My husband, my son." The words still caught in her throat. "I couldn't turn away. Not if I could help." Chaska nodded slightly. "Good reason. Thank you." Evelyn Mercer. Hearing her name from his lips startled her. "You should rest," Evelyn advised, professional, manner reasserting itself. "As has yours," Chaska observed, his perception uncomfortably acute despite his weakened state. Standing between 2 fires is dangerous place. A commotion outside drew their attention. Running Deer moved swiftly to the window. "More of your people come," she reported. "Many more." In town, the gathering at the church had swelled beyond capacity. Sarah Ann Calloway sat in the front pew, her spine rigid with righteous indignation, as Marshal Boone addressed the crowded room. Isaac stood near the back, watching with growing unease. "Harboring the very savages who've raided our settlements and murdered our kin?" Boone's voice rang out. "Mrs. Mercer may believe she's performing Christian charity, but she's endangering every man, woman, and child in this territory." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah Ann rose, her black widow's dress lending gravity to her presence. "It was Sioux raiders who took my Henry," she reminded them, her voice trembling. "Sioux arrows that pierced his heart while he worked our fields. And now one of our own opens her door to their chief?" She shook her head, tears glistening. It's a betrayal of everything we've built here. Isaac stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. Folks, we need to consider what we know for certain. Mrs. Mercer is a healer. She treated my leg when I first arrived, never asking where I came from or what I believed. His meaningful glance reminded them that not all had been so welcoming to a freedman. She's doing what she believes is right. What's right? Boone scoffed. What's right is protecting our own. That woman has a Sioux war party on her doorstep. What happens when their chief recovers? They'll slaughter her and move on to us. You don't know that, Isaac countered. I know Indians, Boone declared, fought 'em before the war between the states. They only understand strength. He addressed the wider crowd. We need to show strength. A mounted force, ready to defend our town and rescue Mrs. Mercer from her misguided charity. A chorus of approval greeted his words. Isaac looked around in dismay as fear transformed into purpose, the dangerous kind that justified violence in the name of protection. And what about the treaty? He asked loudly. Boone's smile was cold. Treaties are for peacetime, friend. This is survival. As the meeting broke up, Isaac caught sight of Sarah Ann in quiet conversation with Boone, their heads bent close together. The satisfied curl of Boone's lips sent a chill down his spine. Isaac slipped away to the livery stable. Someone needed to warn Evelyn about what was coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Back at the cabin, the medicine man had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping in a corner while Running Deer took his place beside her father. Evelyn watched as she sang softly to Chaska, a low, melodic chant that seemed to ease his pain. What are you singing? Evelyn asked when Running Deer paused. A healing song. It calls the spirits to mend what is broken. She hesitated. My mother taught it to me, before the sickness took her. I'm sorry, Evelyn said, recognizing the familiar shadow of loss. My mother taught me healing too. The rest I learned during the war. You fought? Running Deer looked surprised. No, I mended those who did. Evelyn's hands stilled. Sometimes I think fighting might have been easier than watching so many die despite everything I tried. Running Deer nodded slowly. The burden of the healer. To know that sometimes all skill is not enough. A thoughtful silence fell between them, two women from vastly different worlds, finding unexpected common ground. Chaska stirred. Daughter, he murmured in English, go rest, I wish. To speak with Evelyn Mercer. After Running Deer left, Chaska said, Your town prepares for war. Evelyn shook her head. They're afraid, not warlike. Fear makes the best warrior, he replied, and the worst peacemaker. His dark eyes studied her. Why did you come west, Evelyn Mercer? The question caught her off guard. To start fresh, after losing so much in the war. And did you find this? Fresh start? Evelyn considered. I found solitude, purpose of a kind, but not peace. She hadn't admitted this to anyone. Not truly. Chaska nodded. My people, say. Wounded spirits call to each other. Perhaps that is why I found your door. Hoofbeats approached at a gallop. Moments later, Isaac and Running Deer entered the cabin, Isaac's expression grim. Evelyn, there's trouble. Boone's rallied the town. They're coming at first light, armed and looking for blood. He cast an apologetic glance at Chaska. They're not planning on talking. Running Deer's hand moved to her knife. Then we will meet them with our own strength. No. Chaska and Evelyn spoke simultaneously, exchanging a startled look. There must be another way, Evelyn insisted. If we could just get them to listen. They will not listen, Running Deer said bitterly. Your Marshal Boone wants war. Isaac shook his head. Not everyone follows Boone willingly. Some are just scared. Chaska's voice broke the silence, his words carrying the weight of prophecy. Tomorrow will bring blood or peace. The choice was mine when I fell at your door. Evelyn Mercer. He looked at each of them in turn. Now it belongs to all of us. Dawn broke cold and clear across the Dakota plains, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. Evelyn had not slept. She sat by the window, watching both the sunrise and the Sioux encampment that had settled into a wary routine around her cabin. Women tended small cooking fires. Warriors maintained their positions in a protective ring. Children, initially hidden away, now darted between teepees that had been erected overnight. It would have been beautiful if not for the dread coiling in her stomach. They will come soon, Running Deer said, appearing silently beside her. The young woman had taken to moving through the cabin as if born to it, her presence a strange comfort in these uncertain hours. I know, Evelyn replied, rubbing tired eyes. Isaac said first light. Running Deer's gaze swept the horizon. My father is awake. His fever broke in the night. That's good news, Evelyn said, brightening. Slightly. Perhaps if Chaska could speak to Boone directly, explain the situation. As if sensing her thoughts, Running Deer shook her head. He is stronger, yes, but not strong enough to face your marshal. A shout went up from one of the Sioux sentries. Both women turned toward the eastern horizon, where a cloud of dust announced the approaching riders. Evelyn's heart sank as she counted at least a dozen mounted men, with Marshal Boone's tall figure unmistakable at their head. It begins, Running Deer murmured. Evelyn straightened her skirts and touched the small cross at her neck. Let me speak to them first, alone. They come with guns, not words. Then let them see me unafraid, Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. It may give them pause. Before Running Deer could object, Evelyn was out the door, crossing her small porch with deliberate steps. The morning air was crisp in her lungs as she walked to the edge of her garden, well away from both the Sioux warriors and her cabin. A neutral ground, if such a thing existed anymore. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Boone raised his hand, signaling them to halt 50 yards from where Evelyn stood. She could see faces she recognized, men from town who'd once tipped their hats to her on the street, who'd accepted her poultices and tinctures with grateful nods. Now they looked at her as if she were a stranger, or worse, an enemy. Mrs. Mercer, Boone called, his voice carrying across the distance. Step aside now. We're here to resolve this situation. There's no situation to resolve, Marshal, she called back, keeping her voice steady. Chief Chaska is healing. His people are peaceful. There's been no trouble. Boone's laugh was harsh. No trouble? Woman, you're surrounded by savages who've murdered good folk not 10 miles from here. That's a lie. The voice came from behind Evelyn. Chaska, supported between Running Deer and Red Elk, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes clear and fierce. My people have not raided since last harvest moon. Murmurs ran through the mounted men. Boone's face darkened. Well now, the chief himself. How convenient. He nudged his horse forward a few steps. I've got witnesses say different. 3 homesteads hit in the last month, livestock taken, 1 man dead. Not by Mudawakaton hands, Chaska insisted, his breathing labored from the effort of standing. All Indians look the same to a grieving widow, Boone drawled, his hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. The tension stretched between them, a live wire ready to spark. Evelyn could feel the momentum building toward violence. Behind Boone, several men had already unslung rifles from their shoulders. Let's all just calm down, came Isaac's steady voice as he nudged his mare forward to stand beside Boone. There are women and children here. Surely we can talk this through like civilized folk. Civilized? Boone scoffed. Look around you, Tally. These people don't understand civilization. They only understand force. From the corner of her eye, Evelyn saw Sioux warriors edging closer, bows half drawn. One wrong move from either side would ignite the powder keg. "Marshal Boone," she called, desperation lending strength to her voice. "I am not being held against my will. I chose to help Chief Chaska, as I would help any injured person who came to my door, as I helped Mr. Whitaker's boy last winter, and Mrs. Calloway when her fever wouldn't break." She took a step toward the mounted men. "You all know me. I've tended your families. I'm asking you now to trust my judgment." A few of the men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Doubt flickered across faces that had been set in grim determination moments before. "She's been enchanted by them," came a woman's voice, and Sarah Ann Calloway rode forward from the back of the group, her widow's black stark against the morning light. "Can't you see? It's what they do. Bewitch good Christian women. My Henry told me stories of white women taken in by Indian ways, forgetting their own kind." "No one has bewitched me," Evelyn said firmly, recognizing how quickly Sarah Ann's words could undo her progress. "I'm the same woman who sat with you when grief kept you from sleeping, Sarah Ann. The same woman who made willow bark tea for your headaches." Sarah Ann's lips thinned. "And now you tend the very sort who made me a widow." "Not the same," Chaska said, his voice stronger now. "Crow Dog Band raided your farm, not my people." He took a labored step forward, shrugging off running, Deer's supporting arm. "I give you my word as chief." Boone's laugh was ugly. "The word of an Indian. That's worth less than spit in the wind." "And what is the word of a man who profits from conflict worth?" Isaac asked quietly, though his voice carried. "A man who's been buying up land cheap every time folks get scared off by raids?" A startled silence fell. Boone's head snapped toward Isaac, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You watch your mouth, boy. Remember your place." "My place is with the truth," Isaac replied, unflinching. "And the truth is, there's been no Sioux raid within 50 miles of here since last fall. The attacks you mentioned were lone riders, white men with faces painted to look Indian. I tracked them myself after the Miller place was hit." Boone's hand moved to his gun. "That's a damned lie." "No," came another voice from among the riders, Samuel Whitfield, the storekeeper. "My cousin over in Fort Pierre wrote me about the same thing happening there. White men disguised, stirring up trouble so the army would be called in." He looked troubled. Land speculators following behind, buying up homesteads for pennies on the dollar. All eyes turned to Boone, whose face had gone the color of thunderclouds. "This is absurd. We came here to rescue a woman in danger, not listen to wild accusations." "I'm not in danger," Evelyn insisted, "and I'm not leaving." Behind her, Chaska suddenly staggered, his strength finally giving out. Running Deer caught him, but not before a groan of pain escaped him. The sudden movement startled one of the nervous townsmen, who raised his rifle instinctively. "No!" Evelyn cried, moving to place herself between the guns and the chief. The moment teetered on the edge of disaster, Sioux bows drawn, settler. Rifles raised, Boone's hand on his revolver. "Enough!" Isaac's voice cracked like a whip. He urged his horse forward, deliberately blocking Boone's line of sight. "There are a dozen witnesses here who've heard accusations that need investigating. The Indian agent from Fort Thompson should be notified. The proper authorities—" "I am the proper authority," Boone snarled. "Not anymore," Whitfield said, his normally mild voice firm. "Not until we get to the bottom of these claims." A ripple of agreement moved through the other men. Boone looked around, seeing his control slipping away. His jaw worked as he visibly calculated his options. "This isn't over," he finally said. echoing his words from the day before, but with a deadlier undertone. He wheeled his horse around sharply. "I'll be back with men who remember their loyalty." He spurred his mount and rode off alone, dust billowing in his wake. The remaining settlers sat awkwardly on their horses, caught between retreat and reconciliation. "Perhaps," Evelyn suggested into the uncertain silence, "some of you might want to step down, share some coffee, meet Chief Chaska properly." She glanced back at the Sioux camp. "I believe there's much we could learn from each other, if we're willing." It was a fragile moment. A bridge extended across a chasm of mistrust. But as Isaac dismounted, followed hesitantly by Whitfield and two others, Evelyn felt the first stirring of hope that had eluded her since the storm that brought Chaska to her door. Behind her, the chief watched with knowing eyes, his words from the night before echoing in her mind. Tomorrow will bring blood or peace. Today, at least, it would not be blood. An uneasy peace settled over Evelyn's homestead following Boone's departure. By midday, Samuel Whitfield and 3 other settlers sat on upturned crates near a Sioux cooking fire, accepting cups of strong tea with cautious nods. Isaac engaged Red Elk in halting conversation, having revealed a rudimentary grasp of Dakota phrases picked up during his westward journey. "A remarkable sight," Chaska observed from Evelyn's porch. Despite his wounds, he had insisted on leaving his sickbed, now sitting wrapped in a blanket. His face remained drawn with pain, but his eyes were clear. "I wasn't sure they'd stay," Evelyn admitted, offering him willow bark tea. "Nor was I," he replied. "Courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it is found in simply sitting where you have been taught not to sit. And sometimes in offering a seat to those you've been taught to fear." Chaska studied her. "You are not what I expected, Evelyn Mercer." "What did you expect?" He gazed across the mingled groups, his people and hers, separated by history, but united momentarily on this small patch of Dakota soil. "When I fell at your door, I thought perhaps you would be my passage to the spirit world," he said quietly. "Instead, you have become a bridge to something else entirely." Running Deer approached, her expression troubled. "Father, Red Elk wishes to speak with the council before sunset. He says it cannot wait." Chaska nodded. "He fears what he sees here." "As do many," Running Deer acknowledged, glancing at Evelyn. "But not all." The settlers prepared to leave. Later that afternoon, carrying messages to those who hadn't joined the riding party, Samuel Whitfield mounted his horse with a warning. "The marshal will not be pleased. He's gone to Fort Thompson, likely to bring back more men." "How long?" Isaac asked. 3 days, maybe 4, the storekeeper replied. Not enough folks followed him from town to satisfy his plans. As the settlers rode away, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon. The plains could brew storms with frightening speed, and this one carried the metallic scent of rain heavy on the wind. "A spirit storm approaches," Red Elk announced, having observed the council of elders beneath a stand of cottonwoods all afternoon. "The ancestors speak through thunder. We would be wise to listen." Running Deer translated his words for Evelyn, adding quietly, "He believes your presence disturbs the natural order, that helping my father has upset the balance." "And what do you believe?" Evelyn asked. The young woman hesitated. "I believe that wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected places, and that healing should know no boundaries." As twilight approached, the storm clouds swallowed the horizon. The Sioux broke camp efficiently, many retreating to the protection of the nearby woods. Only a small party remained: Chaska, Running Deer, Red Elk, and 2 warriors who refused to leave their chief unguarded. "You should go with your people," Evelyn told Chaska as she helped him inside. "The cabin is small, but I can make room. For all of you." Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the window panes. Rain began to fall, fat drops quickly becoming a deluge. Red Elk said something in Dakota, his tone sharp. Running Deer's response was equally pointed, though she lowered her eyes respectfully when the old man glared. "What did he say?" Evelyn asked once Red Elk had retreated to a corner. "That we weaken ourselves by accepting your shelter," Running Deer replied quietly. "That the storm is a sign we should not be here." Chaska spoke without turning. "And what did you say in return, daughter?" Running Deer's chin lifted slightly. "That it would be poor thanks to refuse the shelter of one who saved your life. And that perhaps the storm comes to wash away old hatreds, not to punish new understandings." The two warriors positioned themselves by the door, prepared to stand guard through the night. As darkness fell, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain hammered against the roof, and wind found every crack in the modest cabin. Evelyn busied herself with small comforts, stoking the fire, preparing stew, offering blankets that were accepted, with solemn nods. When the meal was finished and Running Deer had convinced Red Elk to rest, a strange quiet settled over the cabin despite the storm's rage. The warriors dozed by the door, and Running Deer sat cross-legged, sorting herbs by the firelight. "You have questions," Chaska said suddenly, his voice pitched low enough that only Evelyn could hear. She looked up from her mending, startled by his perception. "Many," she admitted, "but they may be unwelcome." "Ask," he invited. "The night is long, and truth often flows easier in darkness." Evelyn set her sewing aside. "How did you come? To be wounded?" "You were too far from your people." "I was scouting, alone. There have been settlers pushing further into our hunting grounds." His hand drifted to his bandaged shoulder. "I found 3 men. They were not honorable men." "Boone's men," Evelyn guessed. Chaska nodded. "They wore no uniforms, but they spoke of him, of plans for our lands." His expression darkened. "I have seen such men before. During the Great Uprising when my brother fought for our people." "Your brother," Evelyn repeated softly. "Chasky was his name. It means firstborn son." Chaska's voice carried a lifetime of love and loss. "He was everything I was not. Brave without thinking. Quick to laugh, quick to anger. The women of our tribe wrote songs about his smile. What happened to him? He died at the end of a rope. After the fighting, when your government hanged 38 of our warriors in one day." Chaska's voice remained level, but his eyes reflected old pain. "I watched from hiding. He saw me, met my eyes as they placed the hood over his head. His last words were for me, 'Lead with wisdom, not vengeance.'" Evelyn felt the weight of his grief. "I'm sorry. It was many winters ago. The wound scars, over. But it never truly heals." He studied her face in the firelight. "You know this truth as well." Evelyn nodded. "My husband, John, he came back from the war. Changed. The things he'd seen." She swallowed hard. "He lived 3 more. Years, but his spirit had already departed. Some mornings I'd find him staring at nothing, tears on his face." "The sickness of battle," Chaska said. "Many of our warriors know it too." "And then Thomas, my son." Evelyn's voice caught. "Just 6 years old. We were 2 weeks into the journey when he took ill. Fever, then coughing blood. The wagon. Train couldn't stop. Winter was coming. We buried him beside the trail and kept moving that same day." A tear escaped before she could prevent it. Chaska reached out and brushed it from her cheek with a calloused thumb. "The voices of the dead stay with us," he said gently, "speaking in our dreams, in our memories." "Sometimes I think I hear him laughing," Evelyn confessed. "When the wind moves through the cottonwoods just so. then he is not truly gone. My brother visits me in the cry of the hawk, in the first thunder of spring. They sat in companionable silence, two wounded souls finding unexpected resonance in shared grief. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but within the cabin, something fragile and precious was taking root. From his corner, Red Elk watched with troubled eyes. When Running Deer approached him with tea, he spoke in hushed Dakota. "Your father walks a dangerous path. The white woman's medicine has healed his body but may poison his spirit." Running Deer glanced toward Evelyn and Chaska, their heads bent close in conversation. "I see no poison, grandfather, only understanding." "Understanding leads to weakness," Red Elk insisted. "We cannot afford weakness, not with our people's future hanging by a thread. The settlers push closer every season. Their promises turn to ash in our mouths." "Perhaps not all settlers are the same," Running Deer suggested, "just as not all tribes are the same." Red Elk's expression hardened. "You are young." "You did not see the massacres of our people, the broken treaties, the stolen children." "I have seen enough," Running Deer countered respectfully. "I have seen hatred breed only more hatred. And now I see my father speaking with an open heart to one who saved his life." "It is a sickness of the soul," Red Elk warned. "This reaching toward the very hands that would destroy us. Or perhaps it is medicine for the soul, to find humanity where we expected only enmity." The old man shook his head sadly. "Your mother would weep to hear such words." Running Deer flinched as if struck but said nothing more. Across the cabin, unaware of this exchange, Evelyn found herself speaking of things she had shared with no one. "Sometimes I wonder if I came west hoping to die," she admitted, "to simply fade away into this vast landscape." "And now?" Chaska asked. She watched the firelight paint shadows across his dignified features. "Now I'm not so certain. There's still beauty in this world. Purpose, perhaps." "Purpose," he echoed. "Yes, the Great Spirit does not preserve us through hardship without reason." A violent gust of wind rattled the door. One of the warriors stirred, hand moving to his knife before settling back. "What will happen when Marshal Boone returns?" Evelyn asked, voicing the fear that had lingered beneath their conversation. Chaska's expression grew solemn. "Conflict, unless wisdom prevails. He is a man driven by greed and fear, a dangerous combination. And your people? Will they fight?" "Some wish to," he acknowledged. Red Elk counsels caution but preparation. He has seen too many broken promises to trust in peace. Chaska's gaze returned to her. "But I have seen something different in this cabin, a possibility that few would dare imagine." Lightning illuminated the room, casting their shadows against the wall, distinct yet interconnected. In that brief flash, Evelyn saw not a Sioux chief and a white settler, but simply two people seeking connection across an impossible divide. "There must be a way forward that doesn't end in bloodshed," she whispered. "Perhaps." Chaska's voice was thoughtful. "But it would require courage greater than facing an enemy in battle. It would demand the courage to see an enemy as human." "Is that what we are?" Evelyn asked. "Enemies?" Chaska was silent for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "I do not know what we are, Evelyn Mercer, but I believe we are something new, something without a name." The storm raged on, indifferent to the fragile understanding blooming within the cabin walls. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Boone's return, the mistrust of both peoples, the weight of history that favored division over unity. But for tonight, in the shared language of loss and hope, two worlds had briefly touched, and neither would ever be quite the same again. Morning broke. Clear after the storm, the plains washed clean beneath a crystalline sky. Evelyn found Chaska already awake, watching the sunrise from her porch despite his wounds. "Your fever has broken," she observed, noting the clarity in his eyes. "Your medicine is strong," he acknowledged. "As is your coffee, if you have any, to spare." The small joke, his first, brought a smile to her face. They stood in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the dew-drenched grass golden. The Sioux encampment was stirring to life, smoke rising from rekindled fires. "I have been thinking," Chaska said finally, "about what comes next." "As have I. Boone will return with more men with guns and authority. My warriors are prepared to fight. It is our way." His gaze shifted to her. "But I have seen too many of my people die for pride." "What are you suggesting?" she asked, sensing his direction. "A council of peace. Here, at your home." Chaska gestured to the space between her cabin and the Sioux camp. "Your leaders and mine, speaking face to face before blood is shed. Do you think they would come?" "Some would, the wise ones, the ones who see beyond their fear." His expression was grave but resolute. "And some of my people would come as well." "Red Elk?" she questioned. "He will oppose it. But he will come if I ask it of him. His loyalty runs deeper than his doubts." Evelyn considered the enormity of the proposal. A meeting between settlers and Sioux, not forced affairs arranged by government agents, but a genuine attempt at dialogue between equals. "It could be dangerous," she said carefully. "Yes," Chaska agreed. "Peace always carries its own dangers." He turned to face her. "But I have seen something in these past days that I had forgotten existed. Possibility." The word hung between them, fragile and potent. "I'll speak to Isaac," she decided. "If anyone can bring the right people here, it's him." As if summoned by their conversation, Running Deer appeared. "You have made a decision," she observed. "We will try the path of words before the path of blood," Chaska told her. "A council of peace." Running Deer's eyes widened. "Here? With the settlers?" "Yes. Will you stand with me, daughter? Even against those who will call it weakness?" She straightened. "Always, father." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparations. Isaac rode tirelessly between Evelyn's homestead and town, returning with cautious commitments. Several influential settlers agreed to attend: Reverend Porter, Samuel Whitfield, and even Mayor Hollister. Others flatly refused, including Sarah Ann Calloway, whose bitter response Isaac reported with a grimace. "I'll not break bread with savages, nor with those who harbor them." Yet as the appointed hour approached on the third day, Sarah Ann's buggy was among those that arrived, her widow's black a stark contrast to the autumn day. She nodded stiffly to Evelyn but avoided looking at any Sioux. Chaska had arranged his delegation with equal care: Red Elk, still disapproving but present; 2 elder warriors whose headdresses spoke of their status; and Running Deer, whose presence, as a woman raised eyebrows but was accepted without comment. Evelyn had prepared a neutral ground, logs arranged as seats around a small fire, sacred to the Sioux as a witness to important words. The gathering had just begun to settle when the sound of approaching horses drew all eyes westward. Marshall, Boone rode at the head of a small party, his expression thunderous. Behind him rode 3 harder-looking men Evelyn didn't recognize. "Well now," Boone called as he dismounted. "Isn't this a touching scene? Playing at peace while the territory burns." "Marshall," Mayor Hollister greeted nervously, "we didn't expect you back so soon." "Clearly. I ride to Fort Thompson seeking military aid, only to return and find half the town taking tea with the enemy." He spat into the dust for emphasis. "There's been no hostility here," Isaac said, rising. "Only civil conversation, which you're welcome to join." Boone's hand drifted to his holster. "I'll join your little party tally. Someone's got to represent law and order in this farce." He stalked to an empty place, his men taking positions behind him. The atmosphere grew brittle with tension. Chaska, seated directly across from Boone, raised his hand in greeting. "Marshal, you bring new faces to our council." "Deputies," Boone said curtly. "Men who know your kind's handiwork firsthand." One of the Sioux elders said something in Dakota. Running Deer translated, "Silverhawk asks that weapons be left outside the circle. It is our custom during peace talks." "And it's my custom to keep my sidearm where I can reach it," Boone countered. Mayor Hollister cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could all agree to keep weapons holstered or sheathed? A compromise?" After a tense silence, Chaska nodded. "This is acceptable." Evelyn stepped into the center, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Thank you all for coming. This meeting may be unusual, but these are unusual times. Chief, Chaska and I believe there's a path forward that doesn't require bloodshed." "Pretty words," Boone interrupted, "but they don't erase what these savages have done. The Miller homestead was raided just last month. Livestock taken, fences burned." "Not by Mediwa Canton hands," Chaska stated firmly. "My people have kept the peace since the treaty was signed." "All Indians look the same in the dark," one of Boone's deputies muttered. Red Elk bristled, speaking rapidly. Running Deer translated, "The elder says accusations are easy, proof is harder. Where is your evidence that Sioux warriors were responsible?" "I don't need evidence," Boone snapped. "I need only count the Eye. Dead settlers from here to the Missouri." "And we need only count our dead from here to the sacred Black Hills," Red Elk retorted through Running Deer. "Villages burned, children starved, women violated." The exchange was deteriorating rapidly. Before Evelyn could intervene, Sarah Ann spoke. "My husband was murdered by Sioux raiders," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I found him with 3 arrows in his chest. That's all the evidence I require." A heavy silence followed. Then, to everyone's surprise, Red Elk addressed her directly in halting English. "My wife, my daughter, killed by soldiers, blue coats." His weathered face reflected old pain. "I understand. Your grief." Sarah Ann blinked, clearly startled. That's different," she managed, though with less conviction. "How is it different?" Evelyn asked gently. "Loss is loss. Pain is pain." "Because they're savages," Boone interjected. "Christ almighty, have you all lost your minds? These people have been raiding and killing since before any of us set foot here." "And what were we doing?" Isaac asked quietly. "Taking their land, breaking treaties, pushing them from their homes." He turned to Red Elk respectfully. "I was a slave once. I know what it means to be seen as less than human." The unexpected alliance, a black freedman and a Sioux elder, created a ripple of discomfort. Boone's face darkened. "This is seditious." "Talk," he warned. "These lands belong to the United States government, secured by treaty and law." "Treaties written in your language," Running Deer pointed out. "Laws that serve only your people." The argument spiraled, grievances from both sides spilling out after years of suppression. Evelyn watched in dismay as the fragile hope began to crumble. "Enough!" she finally cried, moving to stand at the center once more. All eyes turned to her in surprise. Evelyn Mercer, the quiet widow, had never raised her voice in public memory. "Look at us," she continued, her voice steadying. "Each so certain of our righteousness, our suffering, our claims. I've tended the wounded from both sides. I've cleaned bullet holes and arrow wounds alike. And do you know what I've learned?" She paused, meeting each gaze in turn. "Blood looks the same, no matter whose veins it flows from. Pain sounds the same, no matter what language cries out with it." The circle had gone utterly still. Even Boone was silent, though his expression remained hostile. "3 days ago, I found a wounded man at my door," Evelyn continued. Not a savage, not an Indian. A man, bleeding as any of you would bleed. I made a choice. To see the human before. Me, not the enemy I'd been told to fear. She gestured to Chaska, and in return I found not violence but wisdom, not hatred but possibility. She turned to face Boone directly. You speak of law, Marshal, but there's a higher law than any written in Washington. The law that says we recognize the humanity in one another or we perish in our blindness. Sarah Ann shifted uncomfortably. It's not so simple, Evelyn. There's been too much blood spilled. Yes, Evelyn agreed, softening. On both sides, which is why it must stop. Someone must be brave enough to say enough, even with their wounds still fresh. Red Elk spoke, his expression thoughtful. Running Deer translated. The elder asks if words alone can heal what weapons have torn open. No, Evelyn admitted. Words are just the beginning, but they're a better beginning than more graves. For a long moment, the circle remained silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, Chaska nodded to her, a gesture of respect that carried more weight than any spoken praise. The council continued for another hour, moving from recriminations to cautious, practical matters. Ground rules were established for hunting parties. A neutral trading area was proposed. Small steps, fragile as new shoots after a prairie fire, but steps nonetheless. Boone remained silent through most of it, his cold eyes calculating. When the gathering finally broke apart, he mounted his horse without a word, his deputies following close behind. Evelyn watched him go with foreboding. The marshal had been too quiet, too contained. It wasn't surrender she'd seen in his posture, but something far more dangerous, patience. The patience of a predator waiting for a more advantageous moment to strike. As the other settlers departed with awkward but genuine farewells to the Sioux leaders, Chaska joined Evelyn on her porch. It was a beginning, he said, answering her unspoken question. But only a beginning, she replied. Boone hasn't given up. No, Chaska agreed, his gaze following the marshal's distant figure. Men like him rarely do. But today, his voice was not the only one heard. He turned to her with unexpected warmth. You spoke with the heart of a chief, Evelyn Mercer. She felt her cheeks flush. I spoke as I felt. Which is why your words carried power. His hand briefly touched hers, a fleeting contact that seemed to bridge more than physical distance. The path ahead remains difficult, but for the first time in many seasons, I can see its direction. As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the plains, Evelyn allowed herself to hope that perhaps the circle drawn around her cabin might become not a boundary of conflict, but a gathering place of understanding. Yet even as that hope took root, she couldn't shake the certainty that Boone's next move would test it to its very limits. The fragile peace lasted 2 days. For 48 hours, an uneasy hope had settled over Evelyn's homestead. Small delegations of settlers visited, awkward but curious. Sioux children played within sight of the cabin, no longer hidden away at the first sound of approaching horses. Even Red Elk had unbent enough to share some herbal knowledge with Evelyn. Chaska's strength returned gradually. On the second evening, he walked the perimeter of the camp without assistance. When he joined Evelyn on her porch as sunset painted the plains in fiery gold, his presence carried an ease that hadn't been there before. Your people prepare to leave, she observed, noting the packing taking place throughout the encampment. Yes. Tomorrow we return to our village. The hunting season grows short, and winter preparations cannot wait. He glanced at her, something unspoken in his eyes. But this will not be an ending. Running Deer approached with a small, wiry boy of perhaps 8 summers. His dark eyes darted between Evelyn and Chaska with undisguised curiosity. This is Little Bear, Running Deer introduced him. He wished to meet the healer woman before we depart. The boy bowed solemnly, then extended his hand in the white man's greeting. "Thank you for saving our chief," he said in careful English. Evelyn's heart melted as she accepted his small hand. "You speak English very well, little bear." Pride flashed across his face. "My father taught me before he joined the ancestors. He said knowledge of many tongues makes a strong warrior. Little Bear lost his family in the sickness 2 winters ago," Running Deer explained quietly. "The tribe raises him as one of our own." The boy seemed unconcerned by this discussion of his orphaned status, his attention already captured by Evelyn's herb jars. "Medicines?" he asked, pointing. "Yes." She smiled. "Would you like to see?" For the next hour, Little Bear followed Evelyn as she explained her remedies. His quick intelligence and earnest questions reminded her painfully of Thomas. When she showed him how to grind yarrow leaves for a poultice, his small hands working. With intense concentration, she had to turn away momentarily to compose herself. "He has healer's hands," Chaska observed when the boy rejoined Running Deer outside. "And he has taken a shine to you." "Children adapt so readily," Evelyn said, watching Little Bear dart between the teepees. "They see possibilities where adults see only barriers." "Perhaps we could learn from them," Chaska replied, his voice carrying a new warmth. He hesitated. "I would like to return here, after the winter, to continue what we have begun." The fee. Simple statement contained layers of meaning that neither was ready to fully articulate. "I would welcome that," she said carefully. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his bearing. Before he could respond further, a commotion arose at the edge of the camp. A Sioux scout had returned, his horse lathered from hard riding. Chaska straightened immediately, all trace of personal sentiment replaced by alertness. He strode to meet the scout, who spoke rapidly in Dakota, gesturing eastward with urgency. Running Deer appeared at Evelyn's side. Riders approached the hunting camp, she translated. Many riders armed and moving fast. "Which hunting camp?" Evelyn asked, dread coiling in her stomach. "The one at Twin Creeks where most of our people are. The treaty gives us clear rights to hunt there." Chaska barked. Orders and warriors began mounting quickly. He returned to Evelyn, his face grim. "I must go. If there is trouble—" "I'm coming with you," she interrupted, already reaching for her medical bag. "No." His refusal was gentle but firm. "It may be nothing, a misunderstanding, but if it is more, I would not have you in danger." The look they exchanged carried the weight of all that remained unsaid between them. He simply nodded once, a gesture of both farewell and promise, before mounting his horse. Within minutes, most of the warriors had departed, leaving only a handful behind with the women and children. Running Deer remained, torn between accompanying her father and staying to organize those left behind. "Should I ride for town?" Evelyn asked. "Get Isaac or the Reverend to help calm things." Running Deer shook her head. "Wait. Let us learn what happens first, but keep your horse saddled." The waiting was excruciating. As dusk deepened into twilight, Evelyn paced her small porch. Running Deer had taken charge of the remaining camp, organizing the women to prepare for quick departure if necessary. Little Bear helped earnestly, carrying bundles and following instructions with solemn determination. The first gunshots echoed across the darkening prairie just as the first stars appeared. Running Deer froze, her head snapping toward the sound. More shots followed, a chaotic, sustained volley that couldn't possibly be a hunting accident or mere warning fire. "Get everyone to the woods," she ordered the other women, her voice sharp with authority. "Now." The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Women gathered children and essential supplies with practiced efficiency, heading for the deeper shelter of the cottonwood stand beyond the homestead. "Go," Evelyn urged Running Deer, who hesitated. "Get them to safety. I'll stay and watch for riders." After a brief internal struggle, Running Deer nodded. If my father returns, tell him where we've gone. Be careful." As the last of the Sioux disappeared into the gathering darkness, Evelyn retreated inside her cabin. She loaded her husband's old revolver with trembling hands, a weapon she'd never fired and hoped never to use. Then she extinguished her lamps and waited by the window, watching the eastern horizon where distant flashes occasionally illuminated the night sky. The single rider appeared without warning, approaching from the direction of the woods. Even in the dim starlight, Evelyn recognized Little Bear's small form, slumped over a horse much too large for him, clinging to the animal's mane as it trotted exhaustedly toward her cabin. She was out the door in an instant, catching the boy, as he half fell from the saddle. Her hands came away wet with blood. "Little Bear, what happened? Where are you hurt?" His eyes were glassy with shock, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Bad men," he managed, his voice barely audible. "They came with fire, shot everyone." Evelyn carried him inside, laying him gently on her kitchen table. Working quickly, she cut away the boy's buckskin shirt, revealing a bullet wound high on his left shoulder, perilously close to his neck. "Brave boy," she murmured as she cleaned the wound. "You're safe now. I'll take care of you." She worked swiftly, extracting the bullet and binding the wound as Little Bear drifted in and out of consciousness. His small body burned with fever, and the single word he repeated in his delirium chilled her to the bone. Soldiers. If the army had attacked the hunting camp, everything they had worked for was lost. Yet something didn't make sense. The nearest fort was days away, and no patrol would attack without warning, not with peace talks freshly concluded, unless Boone had somehow orchestrated this, using his connections. The sound of approaching riders interrupted her thoughts. Many riders, coming fast. Evelyn moved to the window, cradling her revolver. In the pale moonlight, she made out a grim procession, Sioux warriors returning, some wounded, others leading horses bearing still forms wrapped in blankets. Chaska rode at their head, his face a mask of contained fury. She ran outside, relief at seeing him alive, warring with dread. "Chaska, what happened? Little Bear is here. He's wounded but alive." Chaska dismounted despite the obvious exhaustion etched in his features. The hunting camp was attacked, 9 dead, including 3 children, many more wounded. His voice was flat, controlled, but his eyes blazed with barely suppressed rage. "And I know who is responsible." He gestured toward one of the blanket-covered bodies. Before he died, White Fox saw their faces clearly. Not soldiers, hired guns. Men who have been seen drinking with Marshal Boone in the saloon at Fort Pierre. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Boone ordered this? But why would... "To destroy what we built," Chaska said simply. "Peace threatens men who profit from conflict." His gaze moved to his wounded warriors. "Running deer?" "She led the others to safety in the woods," Evelyn assured him. "Little Bear must have gotten separated. Come inside. He's been asking for you." Inside, Little Bear lay pale and still, but his breathing had steadied. Chaska's stern expression softened as he approached the makeshift sickbed, speaking gentle words in Dakota while brushing the boy's sweat-damp hair from his forehead. "He rode through the chaos to warn our camp," Chaska told Evelyn, pride evident in his voice. "A warrior's heart in a small body." Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached again, a single rider this time. Evelyn recognized the silhouette. "It's Isaac," she said, opening the door as her friend practically fell from his saddle. "Evelyn," he gasped, winded from his desperate ride. "There's trouble. The town. They're saying Sioux raiders attacked settlers at Lightning Creek. Boone's..." Got everyone whipped into a frenzy, passing out guns, talking about forming a militia. "Lightning Creek?" Chaska's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That is miles from our hunting grounds, and my warriors were attacked at Twin Creeks not 3 hours ago." Isaac's expression reflected his dawning horror. "Twin Creeks? But that's..." Not what? His eyes moved to the wounded boy, the bloodied bandages. My God. Boone's playing both sides. Explain, Chaska demanded, his patience clearly fraying. Boone's telling everyone in town that Sioux raiders hit a settler camp at Lightning Creek, Isaac said. But you're saying your people were actually the ones attacked, at a completely different location. Yes, by white men, hired guns. Chaska's expression darkened further. While my warriors defended our families, these same men could have attacked your settlers, wearing our dress, using our weapons. Making it look like the Sioux broke the peace, Evelyn concluded, the full scope of Boone's treachery becoming clear. Giving him the excuse he needs to bring in the military and drive your people off the land completely. Isaac shook his head. In disgust? He's been buying up property all over the territory. Land that would be worth a fortune if it weren't for the Indian problem. A heavy silence fell as the implications settled over them. The fragile peace they had built now balanced on a knife's edge, with blood already spilled on both sides. Outside, wounded warriors were being tended by their kin, grief and anger mingling in equal measure. In town, settlers were arming themselves, their fear stoked by Boone's calculated lies. What do we do? Evelyn finally asked, looking between the two men. If Boone succeeds in turning this into a war, then both our peoples lose. Chaska finished, his voice weighted with responsibility. And the only victors will be men like Boone, who build their fortunes on others' suffering. Little Bear stirred, his small hand reaching out blindly. Evelyn took it between her own, providing what comfort she could as the boy's fever raged on, an innocent caught in the crossfire of adult hatreds and ambitions. First, we gather proof, Isaac said firmly. I have friends at the territorial newspaper. If we can expose Boone's scheme before it spirals further. And if we cannot? Chaska asked, the question hanging in the air like gun smoke. None of them had an answer as night settled fully over the Dakota plains, shrouding in darkness the careful seeds of understanding that had, for one brief moment, promised to bloom into something more. Dawn broke with the harsh clarity that often follows tragedy. Evelyn had worked through the night, moving between Little Bear's fevered bedside and the makeshift infirmary the Sioux had established beneath the cottonwoods. Morning light revealed the toll. 9 dead laid out in somber dignity, 15 wounded being tended by grieving relatives. Running Deer had returned from the woods at first light, organizing the women to assist Evelyn's medical efforts. Her face was a mask of controlled emotion as she crushed herbs and prepared poultices with mechanical precision. The warriors want blood, she told Evelyn quietly as they worked side by side. Red Elk says the spirits demand it. And your father? Evelyn asked, dreading the answer. Running Deer's hand stilled. He is. Torn. Chief first, man second. The chief must answer his people's call for justice. The weight of that word, justice, hung between them. What did justice look like in a land where two peoples lived by different laws, where one man's vengeance was another's duty? Chaska had withdrawn to a solitary vigil by the creek, performing rites for the fallen that Evelyn recognized as sacred and private. Even from a distance, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the price of leadership etched into every line of his body. Isaac returned mid-morning, his mare nearly spent from a punishing ride. He dismounted with the awkward haste of a man bearing crucial news. Found one of them, he announced without preamble. A hired gun named Rawlins. He was wounded in the attack. Took a Sioux arrow in the thigh. He's holed up at a trapper's cabin near Lightning Creek. Near where the Indian attack supposedly happened, Evelyn noted. Exactly. And he's talking. The whiskey and blood loss loosened his tongue. He admitted that Boone hired 6 men to stage 2 attacks, one against the Sioux wearing settler clothes, another against the outer homesteads wearing Indian dress. Isaac's expression was grim. Boone promised them double pay if it sparked a full-scale war. The territorial marshals must be told. Evelyn insisted. I sent a rider to Fort Thompson, Isaac confirmed, but they're 3 days out at best, by then. He didn't need to finish. By then, the fragile peace they'd built would be reduced to ashes. Chaska approached, having overheard their conversation. His face was a study in contained fury, yet his voice remained measured. Red Elk prepares the warriors for battle. They will not wait for white man's justice. Nor will the town, Isaac added. Boone's gathered 30 men, all armed. They're planning to ride at noon. Evelyn looked between them, desperation clutching at her throat. There must be another way. If we could get Rollins to confess publicly, show the townspeople. Words against blood? Chaska's tone was gentle but skeptical. My people have buried children, Evelyn. Their ears are closed to anything but the war drums. A small voice interrupted them. Not to her. Little Bear stood in the cabin doorway, swaying slightly, his wounded shoulder heavily bandaged. Running Deer rushed to support him, scolding gently in Dakota, but the boy's intense gaze remained fixed on Evelyn. The people listened to her, he insisted in English. She speaks with a mother's heart. Even Red Elk paused when she spoke at the council. Childish optimism, perhaps. Yet something in the boy's unwavering certainty kindled a desperate hope in Evelyn's chest. If we could bring both sides together, with Rollins as witness, she began. Boone would never allow it, Isaac pointed out. Chaska's expression shifted, something dangerous taking root behind his eyes. Then perhaps Boone should not be given a choice. The plan came together with the swift urgency of necessity. Isaac would return to town, gathering those settlers who had attended the Peace Council, people who might still listen to reason. Chaska would engage Red Elk and the Council of Elders, delaying the war party long enough for one final attempt at truth. And Evelyn would ride with Running Deer to secure Rollins, bringing the wounded mercenary to bear witness to his employer's treachery. They parted without ceremony, each aware that failure meant blood on a scale none wished to contemplate. As Evelyn mounted her mare, Chaska stepped close, his hand resting briefly on her stirrup. Be careful, he said simply, the words carrying a weight far beyond their simplicity. You as well, she replied, something unspoken passing between them. I promise, perhaps, or a prayer. The territorial newspaper office in town had never seen such a gathering. By mid-afternoon, the small building overflowed with an unlikely assembly. Reverend Porter, Samuel Whitfield, and a handful of other influential settlers occupied one side of the room, while Red Elk and 3 Sioux Council members stood rigidly opposite them. Isaac positioned himself in the neutral center, beside the newspaper's young editor who looked both terrified and exhilarated by the unprecedented meeting. They're coming, called a lookout from the doorway. Evelyn's group from the east, and Boone's militia from the south. They'll converge at the square. Isaac exchanged glances with the Reverend. Time to test your sermon on turning the other cheek, Pastor. The Lord helps those who help themselves, Mr. Talley, Porter replied, checking the derringer in his coat pocket. Let us pray that words prevail, but be prepared if they do not. They filed into the town square just as Evelyn and Running Deer arrived, supporting between them a pale, sweating man whose leg was crudely bandaged. Behind them rode 2 Sioux warriors, their expressions impassive but their presence unmistakably protective. That's Rollins, Samuel Whitfield murmured, one of Boone's drinking companions. From the opposite direction, dust announced the approach of Boone's makeshift militia, farmers and shopkeepers transformed into armed men by fear and manipulation, with the marshal himself riding point, his face darkening as he took in the unexpected gathering. What in hell's name is this? He demanded, reining in sharply. His hand moved instinctively toward his holster, but froze as he spotted Rollins. You! What are you? Tell them, Evelyn commanded, giving the mercenary a none too gentle shake. Tell them who hired you, what you were paid to do. Rollins swayed, blood loss and fear making him malleable. "It was a job," he mumbled. "Just business, Marshal. You said no one would connect it back to—" "Shut your mouth, you drunken fool." Boone snarled, but the damage was done. Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople, confusion and dawning suspicion replacing blind certainty. Isaac stepped forward, his deep voice carrying across the square. "Marshal Boone hired 6 men to attack both settlers and Sioux, making each side believe the other had broken the peace. All so he could drive the tribes off their treaty lands and buy up territory cheap." He gestured to the editor. "Mr. Wilson here has taken down Rollins' full confession. It will be printed and sent to the territorial governor by nightfall." "This is absurd," Boone blustered, though his confidence had visibly faltered. "You'd take the word of a half-breed, a squaw, and a drunk over your own marshal?" He turned to his militia. "Are you men or mice? The savages are right here in our town." But his words found less fertile ground than before. Men exchanged uncertain glances, lowering rifles slightly as doubt crept in. 9 dead at Twin Creeks," Running Deer stated clearly, her English deliberate and precise. 3 were children, not warriors, children. Her gaze swept the crowd, landing on Sarah Ann Calloway, who had emerged from her shop. "Children like your sons once were, Mrs. Calloway, before they grew to men." The widow flinched as if struck, her hand rising to her throat. "Lies!" Boone shouted, desperation edging his voice. With lightning speed, he drew his revolver, aiming not at the Sioux, but at Rollins. "I'll not be brought down by a spineless—" The shot never came. In a blur of movement almost too swift to follow, Chaska materialized from between 2 buildings, tackling Boone from his horse. They hit the dirt hard, the revolver discharging harmlessly into the air as they grappled. For a breathless moment, violence hung in the balance. The Sioux warriors tensed, hands moving to weapons. Several militiamen raised rifles. The spark that could ignite wholesale slaughter trembled on the edge of existence. "Stop!" Evelyn's voice cut through the tension, like a bullwhip. She moved to stand between the factions, her slight figure somehow commanding in its sheer audacity. "Enough blood has been spilled, enough children orphaned, enough widows made." Beneath her, Chaska had pinned Boone to the ground, knife at the marshal's throat. The moment stretched, taut with deadly potential, as Sioux warrior and frontier lawman locked eyes. "Do it," Boone hissed, a strange smile twisting his lips. "Prove them right about your kind. Give them the excuse they need." Chaska's hand tightened on the knife, years of justified hatred visible in the tendons of his arm. Red Elk watched, approval in his ancient eyes, waiting for the blood that would set their vengeance in motion. Chaska. Evelyn spoke his name, softly, a counterpoint to the violence surrounding them. "This is not the path you showed me. Remember what you said by the fire? About your brother's last words? Lead with wisdom, not vengeance." The unspoken phrase hung between them. For an endless moment, Chaska remained poised on the knife edge of decision. Then, with deliberate control, he lowered the blade, not releasing Boone, but refusing the fatal stroke. "Justice," he said, the word directed not just to Evelyn, but to his own people. "Not vengeance. That is the harder path, the path of strength." He pulled Boone roughly to his feet, addressing the townspeople. "Your law should judge him, for all to see." The collective breath of the gathering seemed to release at once. Reverend Porter stepped forward, nodding to Samuel Whitfield, who produced a length of rope. "The circuit judge arrives next week," the Reverend said. "We'll hold him until then. A proper trial, with Rollins' testimony and the newspaper's evidence." "And our witnesses," Running Deer added firmly. "Our dead deserve a voice." Boone, seeing his control evaporate, made one desperate lunge for freedom. With surprising speed, for his bulk, he broke from Chaska's grip and sprinted toward the livery stables, ducking between buildings. The Sioux warriors moved to pursue, but to everyone's surprise, it was Sarah Ann Calloway who stepped into Boone's path, her late husband's shotgun leveled at his chest. "Not one step further, Marshal," she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "I buried my Henry thinking Indians took him. I've lived with hate festering in my heart. No more." She gestured with the shotgun. "Back to face your reckoning." Surrounded, abandoned by his followers, and facing the combined resolve of two communities he had tried to set against each other, Boone finally surrendered. As Whitfield and two other men secured him, the marshal's cold eyes found Evelyn. "You've made a mistake, Mrs. Mercer," he said softly. "The territory has no place for Indian lovers. One day you'll see I was right." "No, Marshal," she replied, equally quiet. "The mistake was thinking that hate is stronger than hope, and I pray you never see how wrong you've been." As Boone was led away, the unlikely gathering in the town square began to disperse, not in the unified hatred that Boone had envisioned, but in small clusters of hesitant conversation, Sioux and settler alike. Not friends, not yet, perhaps not ever, but no longer quite so certain of their enmity. Chaska found Evelyn at the edge of the square, exhaustion etched in the lines of her face. "You saved more than Boone's life today," she told him quietly. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, watching Red Elk deep in conversation with Reverend Porter, an unlikely dialogue that would have seemed impossible days before. "Or perhaps your words saved us all from a darkness we might never have escaped." Running. Deer approached, leading their horses. "Little Bear's fever has broken," she informed them. "He asks for the healer woman." Evelyn smiled, the first genuine smile in what felt like lifetimes. "Then we should not keep him waiting." Together, they mounted and turned toward the homestead, riding not as representatives of opposed worlds, but as three people united by a fragile, newfound understanding, a circle of trust that had withstood its greatest test and emerged, improbably, intact. 3 days after Boone's arrest, the territorial marshals arrived from Fort Thompson. They took statements from both settlers and Sioux, documenting the attacks with the dry precision of government officials. Rollins had been moved to the town jail, his wound treated by Evelyn herself, a mercy the mercenary clearly hadn't expected. "Justice will come through proper channels," the lead marshal assured the gathered representatives of both communities. "The territorial governor takes these matters seriously." Few believed justice would be that simple, but the official recognition of Boone's crimes had eased tensions considerably. The Sioux hunting party had resumed their seasonal activities, though now with settler volunteers riding alongside as witnesses and protection, an arrangement suggested by Isaac that had initially raised eyebrows on both sides. Life was settling into a cautious new rhythm. Evelyn had thrown herself into caring for the wounded, traveling between her cabin and town as needed. Little Bear had appointed himself her assistant, following her with solemn dedication as she changed bandages and mixed remedies. "He has found his calling," Running Deer observed, watching the boy carefully fold strips of clean cloth. "And perhaps a new mother." Evelyn had no response to that, the possibility too tender to examine closely. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that filled her heart each time Little Bear's serious face lit up with a rare smile at her approval. The evening was cool, but pleasant, as Evelyn returned to her cabin after a long day in town. Chaska had ridden with her as far as the creek before continuing to the Sioux camp a half-mile distant. Their conversations had evolved in the days since the confrontation, moving beyond immediate crises to deeper sharing of beliefs and histories. Something was growing between them. Fragile, undefined, but undeniable. As she crested the final rise approaching her homestead, a flicker of orange light caught her attention. Her first thought was that Running Deer had lit the lamps, The young woman occasionally waited for her return with herb preparations or simply companionship. Then, she smelled the smoke. Evelyn's heart seized as she urged her tired mare into a gallop. Rounding the bend, she confronted a scene from nightmare. Her cabin engulfed in flames, the fire a roaring beast that had already consumed half the structure. The night was alight, with deadly beauty, sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky like perverse fireflies. "No!" The cry tore from her throat as she threw herself from the saddle, rushing toward the inferno. The heat struck her like a physical wall 50 feet from the cabin, forcing her to stop. Everything she owned, her medical supplies, her books, her few precious mementos of John and Thomas, all being devoured by insatiable flame. She fell to her knees, watching helplessly as the roof collapsed with a shower of embers. She didn't know how long she knelt there before hands gently gripped her shoulders. Chaska had appeared as if summoned by her despair, his face grim in the firelight. "Who?" she managed, her voice raw. "Tracks lead back toward town," he said quietly. 3 riders. Boone might be imprisoned, but his poison lingered. There were those in town who still blamed Evelyn for siding with the Sioux, who saw her as a traitor to her race. This was their answer, not a direct confrontation, but the coward's approach of destruction under cover of darkness. "Did you see anyone inside?" Running Deer asked, materializing beside them with several warriors. "Little Bear rode to our camp an hour ago. He was looking for you." Relief flooded Evelyn. "Thank God. No, I was in town until sunset." The thought of the boy arriving to find her home ablaze chilled her blood. "Where is he now?" "With the women and Red Elk," Running Deer assured her. "He is safe." There was nothing to be done but watch as the fire consumed what remained of the cabin. By dawn, only the stone chimney stood like a lone sentinel above a bed of smoldering ash and blackened timbers. Evelyn surveyed the ruins numbly as first light revealed the full extent of her loss. Her entire adult life reduced to cinders. The circle that had once surrounded her cabin as a threat, then as a tentative embrace of understanding, now enclosed only desolation. "What will you do?" Chaska asked, standing beside her in the chill morning air. It was the question she'd wrestled with through the sleepless night. Return east? Seek refuge in town with those who still accepted her? Start anew elsewhere on the frontier? Before she could answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A group of riders approached from town, not stealthily this time, but openly in the morning light. Evelyn recognized Isaac at the lead, with Samuel Whitfield, Reverend Porter, and, to her surprise, Sarah Ann Calloway among the party. Behind them came wagons laden with lumber and supplies. "We heard what happened," Isaac said as they dismounted. Some of the men saw riders returning late, bragging in the saloon. His expression was pained. "I should have been here. There was nothing you could have done," Evelyn assured him, though the comfort rang hollow against the backdrop of destruction. "Perhaps not," Reverend Porter acknowledged. "But there is something we can do now." He gestured to the Wago Pring came to the Dakota Plains with its characteristic suddenness, the land transforming from winter's grip to vibrant green seeming lands. The town took a collection. Not everyone contributed, I'm sorry to say, but enough did. Sarah Ann stepped forward, her usual rigid posture softened somewhat. "A home should not be taken by fire," she said, her gaze distant with memories of her own loss. "Whatever our differences, we are still neighbors in this harsh land." From the opposite direction, unexpected movement caught Evelyn's eye. Red Elk approached, flanked by a dozen Sioux men carrying tools and building materials of their own. Little Bear trotted beside the elder, his bandaged arm cradled against his chest, but his face alight with purpose. "The boy insisted," Red Elk explained in his halting English when he reached them. "Says we build. Together." He gestured between the settlers and his own people. Fire cleanses, makes new beginning. It was as close to a blessing as the old medicine man had ever offered. Chaska's face reflected surprise that quickly transformed into solemn approval. 2 hands build stronger than one, he said, extending his arm toward the settlers. After a moment's hesitation, Samuel Whitfield stepped forward to clasp it, Thuti. Day unfolded in a scene Evelyn could never have imagined weeks earlier. Sioux and settler worked side by side, clearing debris, setting foundation stones, raising new timber frames. Women from both communities prepared food, sharing recipes and techniques with curious respect. Children became the natural bridges. Between the groups, their innocent acceptance of difference putting adult hesitations to shame. By sunset, the skeleton of a new cabin stood on the footprint of the old, larger and sturdier than its predecessor. More importantly, it rose from hands that had learned, however tentatively, to work in concert rather than conflict. As darkness fell, Red Elk built a small fire in what would become the central hearth. He produced a pouch of sacred herbs, casting them into the flames with murmured prayers in Dakota. Reverend Porter stood respectfully nearby, his Bible in hand, but closed in deference to the ceremony unfolding. "He says the land remembers," Running Deer translated as Red Elk spoke, his weathered hands making intricate gestures above the fire. "It remembers blood and tears, but also healing hands. The cabin that rises here will carry the strength of 2 peoples if we allow it to grow together rather than apart." When the ritual concluded, Chaska approached Evelyn where she stood, apart, absorbing the improbable tableau before her. "Will you stay?" he asked quietly, the question carrying weight beyond the immediate decision about the cabin. Evelyn watched Little Bear earnestly showing Sarah Ann Calloway how to weave a Sioux-style reed mat. The unlikely pair focused on their shared task rather than the vast differences that separated them. She saw Isaac deep in conversation with a Sioux warrior, mapping hunting boundaries on a scrap of paper with mutual respect. Seeds of understanding, tentatively taking root in soil that had so recently known only conflict. "Yes," she said finally, something settling in her heart. "This is where I belong now." Chaska's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, a touch both tentative and certain. "Then we will build it strong," he said simply. As stars appeared overhead, the mixed gathering settled around fires to share an evening meal, not as 2 separate peoples, but as the beginning of a community finding its way toward a future none had imagined possible. The circle that had once signified threat, then tentative peace, now embodied something else entirely. Possibility. Evelyn's cabin had burned, but from its ashes rose something far more valuable than timbers and nails, a foundation not just for a home, but for a new way of living in this harsh, beautiful land. Together, spring blossomed on the Dakota plains, transforming the land from winter's grip to vibrant green seemingly overnight. 4 months had passed since the fire. Evelyn's new cabin stood completed, larger and sturdier than before, with a dedicated area for her expanding medical practice, shelves lined with remedies contributed by both settler and Sioux healers. On this bright morning, Evelyn sorted through fresh plants on her porch with Little Bear beside her, his dark eyes intent as she identified each specimen. "This one is echinacea," she explained. "Your people call it snake root. For fever and snake bite," he recited proudly. "And this one? Bloodroot. Excellent for skin problems, but poisonous if used incorrectly." She smiled. "Always remember, the difference between medicine and poison is in the dose," he finished. Their routine was interrupted by approaching riders, 3 young women from town and 2 Sioux girls, accompanied by Isaac. Evelyn's twice-weekly medicine class was gathering. "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer," called Abigail Whitfield, the storekeeper's daughter. At 17, she was the oldest student, her initial skepticism about learning alongside Sioux having given way to genuine friendship with White Dove, Running Deer's cousin. As Evelyn began her demonstration on spring tonics, Running Deer approached from the direction of the Sioux camp, which had established a more permanent presence nearby. The territorial governor, pressured by accounts of Boone's misdeeds, had granted an adjustment to the reservation boundaries, allowing Chaska's band settlement rights to this previously contested area. "A letter came," Running Deer announced, handing Evelyn an official document. "The soldier who brings mail left it with Red Elk." Evelyn opened it, scanning the contents before exhaling slowly. "Marshall Boone has been sentenced to 15 years. In federal prison," she reported, "for conspiracy, incitement to violence, and abuse of power." Running Deer's expression remained impassive. "Will it bring back our dead?" "No," Evelyn acknowledged softly. "Nothing can do that, but it may prevent more deaths." The young woman nodded, accepting this partial justice. "My father asked me to tell you he will return by sunset. The hunting was good." The simple domestic exchange struck Evelyn with its quiet significance. 4 months ago, such interaction between their worlds would have been unthinkable. As the lesson concluded, Abigail hesitated before leaving. "Mrs. Mercer, my father asks if you might attend my mother's confinement next month. The baby is positioned poorly." "Of course," Evelyn assured her. "And perhaps Running Deer might accompany me? Her knowledge of herbs to ease childbirth exceeds my own." Abigail's momentary surprise gave way to acceptance. "I'll tell Mother. I think she would welcome that now." By late afternoon, Evelyn found herself alone with Little Bear, who had been unusually quiet, meticulously arranging jars on her shelves. "Is something troubling you?" she asked gently. Little Bear's small hands stilled. "The moon of returning. Birds brings memories. I remember my mother's face less clearly now." Evelyn's heart constricted. The pain of fading memories. How well she understood it. "That happens, with time. But it doesn't mean you've forgotten her love." He nodded, solemnly. "Running Deer says memories live in our hearts even when they leave our eyes." His gaze lifted to meet hers. "I have been thinking, could I stay here? With you? Not just to visit, but to live?" The question she'd secretly hoped for stole her breath. "Little Bear, nothing would make me happier. But what about your place with the tribe?" "I asked Chief Chaska already," the boy confessed. "He said my path is mine to choose, and that perhaps the spirits guided me to one who needed a son as much as I needed a mother." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. "He said that?" Little Bear nodded, adding with devastating simplicity, "I would like to call you Mother, if that is permitted." Evelyn gathered him into her arms. "It is more than permitted. It is a gift I never dared hope for." The boy relaxed against her. "Then I am home, Mother," he said, testing the word like a precious medicine. The sound of approaching horses signaled Chaska's return. Little Bear dashed outside while Evelyn followed more slowly, watching Chaska dismount with characteristic grace. "The boy tells me you have agreed," he said when Little Bear had run to examine the hunting party's bounty. "You are certain?" "It is no small thing to take a child of another people as your own." "As certain as I've ever been of anything," she replied. "Though I'll need guidance." "He should keep his traditions, his language." Chaska nodded. "Running Deer will continue teaching him our ways, and he will learn yours. Afoot in both worlds, a difficult path, but one that may serve him and all of us in time to come." They watched as Little Bear helped the hunters unload their catch. In the distance, Evelyn's students could be seen riding toward town, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "I received a letter today," Chaska said, "from the Indian Agency. They have offered me a position as interpreter and liaison between the tribes and the territorial government." His expression revealed mixed feelings. It is not all I would wish for my people, but it is a voice where before we had none. Will you accept? I am considering it. His gaze met hers. It would mean traveling at times, but also remaining here, where my people are establishing new roots, where other connections have taken hold. The unspoken question hung between them, as delicate and vital as new growth after fire. I would miss you when you traveled, Evelyn admitted softly, and welcome your return each time. Chaska's hand found hers. There is a custom among my people, not marriage as your people know it, but a binding of lives. A recognition that two paths have chosen to join, while each maintains its own direction. Is that what we've done? Joined? Paths while keeping our own directions? His smile was rare and transformative. I believe it is what we are doing, day by day, choice by choice. Little Bear called to them from the creek where several children, Sioux and settler alike, had gathered to play in the spring twilight. Look at them, Evelyn marveled. No division, no fear, just children. The future, Chaska said simply. As dusk settled over the plains, Evelyn stood with Chaska and Little Bear at the heart of what they had created together. Not just a rebuilt cabin, but a circle of trust extending beyond timber and nails, beyond blood and background. It encompassed two peoples taking tentative steps toward understanding, and a family formed not by convention, but by choice, circumstance, and perhaps a touch of destiny. Around them, the Dakota Territory continued its transformation. Challenges remained. Old wounds still throbbed, and the path ahead held no guarantees. But here, in this moment, as Little Bear's small hand slipped into hers while Chaska stood beside them both, Evelyn knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found her place in the circle at last. Up next, you've got two more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.